Welcome back. Now, the National Council of SPCAs, that's the NSPCA, has been granted an interim order by the Gauteng Division of the High Court. That's against Daybreak Foods, which now compels Daybreak Foods, the company, to stop inhumane culling of chickens. Now, that order also compels the company to provide adequate care for hundreds of thousands of breeder birds at risk of starvation, as well as further suffering. There's an estimated 594,000 birds that are at immediate risk of starvation, suffering, even cannibalism, and even injuries and prolonged neglect due to insufficient feeding and inhumane culling practices. For more on this, we're joined by Communications Officer at the National Council of SPCAs, NSPCA, Jacques Peacock, who joins us now. Jacques, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us then. Just want you clarify this order then for us as well. Have we described it correctly there in saying that this is what the court has ordered, that all inhumane culling must stop and ultimately the proper procedures must now be followed by Daybreak Foods?
Absolutely. Good morning, Arabile, and also good morning to the viewers. In essence, the order has 6 parts. As you've said, it was to immediately cease the inhumane culling methods of the larger breeder birds. It was to provide adequate, appropriate species-specific food to birds across Daybreak's operations, so its entire flock. And then, very importantly, until such sufficient feed has been procured, Daybreak is interdicted from breeding any new birds, from sending hatchlings into their system, from placing any birds at their farms, until such time as adequate feed has been provided. And should it be found that even if adequate feed has been provided and they relapse, that order will kick in again. Very importantly, it provides the NSPCA, its agents and representatives, with unfettered access to all Daybreak facilities in order to conduct its inspections in terms of the Animals Protection Act. And it compels Daybreak Food to provide to the NSPCA a timeline and explanation of how it will, in the court's words, resolve this animal welfare crisis. Well, of course, as you've said, this was an interim order. We launched the application on Friday. We were in court on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. So things happened quite fast, and therefore Daybreak will need to show cause, or basically come and explain themselves tomorrow on Tuesday at 2 o'clock in front of Judge Reed to argue why this order should not be made final.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting there. To clarify your position, it's not that you also, as the NSPCA, are against culling, because that is the natural order of things then, whether it be excess chickens or those that aren't perhaps right, or culling is part of the process, but it is the inhumane nature of it, of course, that the NSPCA is against, if I'm correct then. What exactly makes the way that Daybreak Foods has been culling chicken so inhumane and incorrect? Please, if you'd share with us.
So I think in a disaster of this absolute magnitude, the most humane thing that you can do with the compromised birds is to humanely cull or euthanize. And that is what the NSPCA and SPCAs have been doing for the last month. This problem has been dumped at our doors, and we have taken on the responsibility to ensure that these animals are disposed of, as people might call it correctly, which is not sustainable. And during last week, we received an anonymous tip-off from a whistleblower within Daybreak, indicating that these much larger breeder birds at 2 facilities in Limpopo are being culled by wringing their necks. So the chicken would be held by its head, and it will be swung around until the neck eventually breaks, which is inhumane and which is a contravention of the Animals Protection Act.
Yeah, how big a problem is this inhumane culling across the country? Maybe not necessarily in this manner, but just in inhumane manners. Something that you yourselves as the NSPCA have witnessed across the country in many other companies or respects?
Well, I think, in terms of industry, I don't think people realize, how big industry is in South Africa. Things happen that people really don't know about. And at the end of the day, it's all about profit and pushing production as much as possible. So, it's always easy for people to try and find gaps where they can push production, but which then leads to the inhumane slaughter or handling of animals, which is not acceptable not only by the industry standards itself, but also in terms of the Animals Protection Act.
Yeah. Where do Daybreak Foods' problems actually stem from? How did they get to a point where they're also struggling financially? They're sitting with workers that are currently striking, plus they've got this inhumane culling, set against them then as well. What do you think their problems come from, if you're able to share any insight?
I think it is a very high-level problem. For most of the part, the staff that we've interacted with on the ground, the one or two that are still on site, have been nothing but helpful and friendly, and they too acknowledge that their hands are tied. This is a problem of huge proportions at such a high level that I don't think anyone is actually able to at this stage comprehend the possible irregularities that there are, whether it be in terms of mismanagement, whether it be in terms of finances. There was an article in the Sunday Times yesterday about a payment of 625,000 Rand to the previous chairman of the board shortly before they resigned. And there was just news that the PIC had injected another 74 million Rand into Daybreak, which does sound like a lot of money, and which is obviously, money owned by the GEPF, the UIF, and the Compensation Fund. But in the bigger scheme of things, in order to run such a huge operation, it really isn't a lot of money. And whether that money will filter through to the ground, to the workers, to the animals in terms of feed, and for them to receive the care that they require is another question.
Yeah, just a final question. The future of Daybreak Foods, does that look bleak at this stage? Are you expecting it to close? Because this High Court order, if it remains permanent, ultimately ceases puts the business under a lot of risk then, and they'll be unable to operate sufficiently, even with the PIC giving them 74 million Rand.
And I think if you look at other litigation, there's word of liquidation applications against Daybreak. There was a request for voluntary business rescue. So I think it looks bleak, but it should be, because this isn't just about running a business and keeping things afloat. It is about hundreds of thousands of animals that suffer, and the law being broken in the process.
Well, Jacques Peacock, we certainly will see how things fare, especially tomorrow then. As you said, then at 2 p.m., you anticipate Daybreak Foods to be able to answer in front of a judge as to what